Have you ever wondered how much a dog can truly understand the emotions of its owner? Max, a small but mighty miniature schnauzer, was no ordinary dog. He could feel the weight on Alex's heart every single day. Every time Alex walked into school, there was an invisible cloud hanging over him, one that his so-called friends seemed to take pleasure in. They didn't need to say much to hurt him. It was the mocking glances, the whispered jokes, the subtle isolation that made Alex feel small, insignificant. He didn't know how to fight back, too shy and afraid to speak up. He kept everything inside, each day harder than the last. But Max, his little companion, knew. Dogs have a way of sensing what we can't always express. Max saw the sad glint in Alex's eyes, heard the soft sighs as he returned home after school, shoulders heavy with the burden of cruel words. Max would nudge him with his tiny paw, silently asking, "Why are you so sad, Alex?" Yet, Alex never said a word. Max didn't need to hear it. He could feel it deep in his bones. And Max wasn't going to stand idly by while Alex, the one who loved him so deeply, suffered. Max's eyes sparkled with something fierce. The loyalty he felt for Alex grew into something more, an unspoken vow to protect him at all costs. He began to notice how Alex's friends acted around him, the way they would laugh at his expense, the way they would push him to the side, all while pretending to be friendly. Max's instincts, sharp as a tack, started to connect the dots. He wasn't just a dog, he was Alex's protector now. What would Max do? How would a small dog like him, with his wiry fur and tiny paws, possibly help Alex stand up to those bullies? What was brewing in Max's clever mind as he observed the cruel cycle unfold? The answers weren't obvious, but one thing was clear. Max wasn't going to let this injustice slide. No, Max was about to show Alex, and everyone around them, what true loyalty and protection really meant. Max's plan would take more than just a few barks or growls. It would require strategy, intelligence, and a level of cunning only a dog like him could possess. But first, he had to make sure Alex would be safe. Max's sharp, alert eyes never missed a single movement. Each day, as Alex left for school, Max would wait by the window, his nose pressed against the cool glass, watching his owner's every step. At first, he didn't understand why Alex seemed so different, why his tail wasn't wagging, why his walk lacked the usual spring. But soon, Max saw it clearly. The slump in Alex's shoulders, the way his gaze would drop to the floor whenever someone spoke to him. Something wasn't right. It was the way Alex's friends circled him. The casual smirks, the teasing that seemed harmless at first but always left Alex looking down, ashamed. Max would growl under his breath, but Alex never noticed. It wasn't just the words they used. It was their presence, the way they made Alex feel invisible yet exposed at the same time. Max had seen it all. The subtle jabs, the laughter that rang too loudly in Alex's ears, the way he shrank under the weight of their mockery. The first time Max witnessed the bullying firsthand, something shifted within him. Alex had just been shoved in the hallway. The others laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Alex's face said it all. His eyes were wide, hurt, desperate. Max's heart raced. He had to do something. He couldn't stand to see his best friend like this. His instincts, once reserved for chasing squirrels or fetching sticks, began to sharpen in a way Max had never known. This wasn't just about fetching, it was about protecting. That night, after Alex was tucked into bed, Max stayed awake, pacing the floor. His mind worked in overdrive, replaying the scenes from school. He noticed patterns, the way the bullies always waited near the locker, the way they would group up, blocking Alex's path. Max's small, intelligent mind began to piece things together, calculating, learning. His protective instincts surged. He could do something. He wasn't just Alex's pet. He was his guardian, his silent warrior. Max knew he needed to be smart. This wasn't a battle of strength, but of strategy. He would learn their moves, anticipate their every step, and ensure Alex never had to face this alone again. The bond between them was unspoken but undeniable, and Max's loyalty had transformed into something much more powerful, a quiet resolve to stand by Alex's side, no matter the cost. School day seemed longer than usual for Alex, and his stomach twisted in knots as he approached the cafeteria. He could hear the laughter from the other students, the sound of trays clattering, and the chatter that felt like it was all aimed at him. Today, however, was different. Today, his so-called friends had something more planned, something worse. They knew his weak spots, and they were about to exploit them in front of everyone. As Alex sat down at the lunch table, one of the boys, Mike, knocked his tray, spilling his lunch all over him. The laughter started, and soon others joined in, pointing fingers, making cruel jokes, and shoving him further into the corner. Alex's face burned with humiliation, his heart racing as he tried to gather himself. He wished he could disappear, that the ground would swallow him whole. But it didn't. The crowd kept growing, the bullying relentless, until Alex was trapped, powerless, unable to fight back. Max, outside, was pacing nervously in the yard. The sharp sound of laughter reached his ears, but something about it didn't feel right. He could sense the tension in the air. Something in the energy around him had shifted. The bond between Alex and Max was deeper than just companionship. It was a connection that made Max feel the pain Alex felt, as if their emotions were intertwined. Then, the scream. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. A cry, filled with hurt and desperation, cut through the usual noise. It was Alex. Max's ears perked, his body stiffened, and his heart raced. He knew that sound, the pain in Alex's voice. The instant he heard it, his protective instincts exploded into action. He wasn't just a dog anymore. He was Alex's guardian, and nothing would stop him. Max bolted toward the door, his paws skidding against the ground as he scratched at the door. He wanted to be there, to help, to save Alex from the unbearable weight of humiliation. But the door was locked. Panic set in for a moment, but Max didn't give up. His mind was sharp, and he wasn't going to let Alex suffer without a fight. Inside, Alex's face remained red with embarrassment, but his heart was beating in a way he hadn't felt before. Rage mixed with sadness, a desire to stand up, but no way to do so. But in that moment, as Max's cries echoed from outside, something inside Alex stirred. It was as if he could feel Max's determination through the air. The pain wasn't over, but it was the spark Alex needed. Max was out there, and somehow that knowledge made Alex realize he wasn't alone anymore. Max's mind was racing, his small frame brimming with energy, but now it wasn't the kind of energy meant for chasing or playing. It was a new kind of focus. It was the kind of focus that came from deep within him, a drive to protect Alex no matter the cost. Max had seen enough. The cries, the humiliation, the subtle taunts, it all burned in his memory like an unspoken promise. But Max didn't rely on brute force. No, he was far too clever for that. His solution would come not from strength, but from strategy. In the days that followed the bullying incident, Max spent every waking moment observing the bullies. His sharp, intelligent eyes never missed a detail. He would watch them from the shadows, noting their routines, their movements, and the way they interacted with Alex. They weren't the same every day, but they followed a pattern. Mike, the leader, was always the first to act, his words sharp and cruel. Then there was Ben, quieter but no less dangerous, always lurking just behind. And Jake. Jake was the trickiest, the one who loved to use his words to manipulate and push Alex further into the corner. Max studied each of them with precision. Mike was the most arrogant, strutting like a king when he made Alex feel small. But Mike had a weakness: his shoes. Every morning he would scuff them, trying to look tough, but Max noticed that Mike's right shoe was always loose, barely hanging by a single lace. Ben, on the other hand, had a habit of fiddling with his phone when he thought no one was watching. He was distracted, easy to mislead. And Jake? Jake was proud of his tricks, always trying to impress with his quick wit and sharp tongue. But Max could see through it. Jake was hiding something. He was afraid of being exposed for his own insecurities, a vulnerability that Max could exploit. Max's mind was sharp. He wasn't just a dog. He was a strategist. He began to make mental notes, collecting the pieces of the puzzle. Max didn't need to bark or attack to make a difference. Instead, he would wait for the perfect moment, the perfect weakness to exploit. One by one, he'd turn their strength into their downfall. He'd use his knowledge of their habits to disarm them, to expose them in ways they'd never expect. The tables were about to turn, and Max was preparing to show Alex that the world didn't have to be a place of fear and helplessness anymore. Max was about to outsmart them all. The next morning, Alex woke with a knot in his stomach. He knew what awaited him at school: more teasing, more snide remarks from his so-called friends. His heart raced as he stood by the school gate, the familiar tension pulling at him. He wished, just for once, that he could blend into the crowd and disappear. But as he walked toward the front doors, the usual suspects were already waiting. Mike, Ben, and Jake stood in a loose circle, eyes already narrowing as Alex approached. As they began to circle him, the taunts started. "What's up, loser?" Mike sneered, poking Alex in the ribs. Ben grinned, clearly enjoying Alex's discomfort, while Jake, ever the strategist, nudged him with a sly remark about his clothes. The pressure began to mount, the weight of their words crushing Alex's spirit. He lowered his head, eyes darting for an escape, but it was too late. They'd cornered him once again. Just then, a loud, piercing bark shattered the moment. Max, who had been quietly observing from behind the school gate, had had enough. With a burst of energy, he darted toward the group, his small body charging like a fierce lion. His bark was sharp and commanding, a sound full of authority that no one had ever heard from the little dog before. The bullies froze in surprise, momentarily distracted by the sudden commotion. Max didn't hesitate. He barked again, this time moving in closer, teeth bared in a protective snarl. His eyes locked onto Mike, Ben, and Jake with a fierce intensity that made them step back. The surprise was palpable. The bullies had never seen the dog act like this. Max wasn't just barking for attention. He was making a statement. In that brief moment, Alex found his opening. Heart pounding, he pushed through the bullies, rushing past them as Max kept their attention focused on him. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Max had given him the chance to escape, to break free from the suffocating cycle of humiliation. As Alex ran, he glanced over his shoulder, his breath catching in his throat. Max stood his ground, guarding his path with unwavering resolve. It was the first time Alex truly understood the depth of the bond between them. Max wasn't just a pet. He was his protector, his silent ally. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt a spark of hope. Max had shown him something he hadn't realized he needed. Bravery, not from a human, but from the one creature who loved him unconditionally. After the chaotic scene in the schoolyard, Alex's heart was still racing. He didn't fully understand what had just happened, but he knew one thing for sure. Max had just saved him. The tiny dog, who was usually so playful and gentle, had transformed into a fierce protector in a matter of seconds. As Alex hurried home that day, his mind was spinning. Why had Max done that? What had sparked the sudden outburst? Alex hadn't even told Max what was going on. He had never explained the bullying, the loneliness, the torment. And yet, Max had known. When Alex reached home, he slumped onto the couch, trying to make sense of everything. Max, as usual, trotted over to him and jumped onto the cushion beside him, his little tail wagging, but his eyes full of understanding. Alex looked at Max, who sat silently, his gaze steady and unwavering. It was in that moment that something clicked inside Alex. Max wasn't just his pet. He was his friend, his silent ally. The realization hit Alex like a wave, both comforting and overwhelming. Max had always been there, never asking for anything in return, and yet had been the first to step up when Alex needed him most. Alex reached down and gently scratched behind Max's ears, a smile tugging at his lips. Max responded with a soft wag of his tail, his head leaning into the touch. Even though Max couldn't speak, Alex could feel the care in his every action. The way he watched over him, the way he protected him, the way he seemed to sense Alex's emotions without a word. This was more than just a pet. Max was a true friend, and Alex was beginning to understand that this bond went deeper than anything he'd ever experienced before. From that day on, Alex started to rely on Max more and more. At night, he would talk to him about his day, his troubles, and his frustrations. Max listened patiently, as if he understood every word, offering quiet comfort with his presence. At school, when the bullying started again, Alex would look down at his feet and think of Max. He didn't feel as alone anymore. Max was his shield, always there, always watching. And as Alex began to understand this new layer of their relationship, he started to find the courage to stand up for himself, knowing Max was by his side. Max had already shown him the power of silent support, and Alex began to believe that with Max, nothing could break him. The days dragged on, but with each passing moment, Alex felt a subtle shift inside him. The weight of the bullying hadn't disappeared, but something had changed. Max, ever the loyal companion, had become more than just a source of comfort. He had become an active player in Alex's struggle. The little dog, now more aware than ever of Alex's pain, started to do something that no one expected. Max wasn't just watching anymore, he was planning. Max's keen instincts were his greatest asset. He didn't just wait for things to happen. He studied, observed, and processed every moment, his mind working like a well-oiled machine. He knew the exact patterns of the bullies, Mike, Ben, and Jake, like the back of his paw. Every day, he noticed their routines, where they'd gather, when they'd make their move, and most importantly, how they acted when they were about to strike. One morning, as Alex prepared to leave for school, Max stood by the door, ears perked, his body tense. Alex didn't notice at first. His mind clouded with the dread of facing another day of bullying. But Max was on high alert. His tail was still, eyes locked on the front yard where the bullies had often waited to taunt Alex. He had been practicing, honing his instincts, and now he had a plan. He wasn't going to let Alex walk into the same situation again. Max started with small tricks. He would sit quietly by Alex's side as if to shield him. When Alex walked, Max would stay just a step ahead, his body language alert as if leading the way. It seemed like nothing at first, just a dog walking alongside his owner. But Max's eyes were always scanning, his mind a step ahead of the bullies. Every time Alex reached the school gates, Max would pull him to a different route, anticipating where Mike, Ben, or Jake might be lurking. Max began to predict their next move with uncanny precision. He could sense when the bullies were near, their footsteps heavy and slow, their voices filled with mockery. Without fail, he would position himself in the right place at the right time, subtly pulling Alex away from the confrontation. It wasn't always obvious, but Alex started to notice how his path seemed to change unexpectedly, how Max would guide him away from trouble just when he needed it most. Max wasn't just reacting anymore. He was controlling the situation. The more Max practiced, the more Alex realized something important. Max wasn't just saving him from the bullies, he was teaching him how to avoid them altogether. Max's protective instincts had reached a new level. He was no longer just following Alex around, guiding him away from the bullies. He had become the quiet, unseen force that worked behind the scenes to disrupt their every move. The bullies, unaware of the silent war being waged against them, continued their daily routines, their laughter and jabs aimed at Alex. But Max was always one step ahead, silently orchestrating little disruptions in the background. It started with the small things. The first time Mike's prized sneakers went missing, he didn't think much of it. He'd left them by his locker, and when he went to grab them, they were gone. Max, ever the clever dog, had snatched them up, carried them off to a hidden spot, and chewed them up. It wasn't an accident. It was a warning. The next day, Jake found his phone screen cracked, and Ben's brand new hat had mysteriously disappeared. The bullies shrugged it off, convinced it was just coincidence, nothing more than the usual schoolyard mishaps. But the disruptions didn't stop there. Max was relentless. Whenever Mike or Jake would approach Alex, trying to provoke him, Max would appear out of nowhere. He'd dart across their path, blocking their way, barking fiercely, or even jumping up to nip at their heels. At first, the bullies laughed, thinking it was just a random annoyance. But slowly, their laughter began to fade, replaced by confusion and growing irritation. How could a small dog be so consistently in their way, always showing up when they tried to torment Alex? Max had learned their schedules, their patterns, their weaknesses, and he was using them to his advantage. He chewed on the straps of Ben's backpack, ensuring that it wouldn't close properly the next time he tried to use it. He even managed to knock over Jake's water bottle just as he was about to spill it on Alex's books. Each small act added up, and the bullies began to feel a creeping unease. Something was off, but they couldn't put their finger on it. Despite their mounting frustrations, they dismissed it as nothing more than bad luck, blaming each other for the odd occurrences. They had no idea that the source of their misery was a small, determined dog named Max, silently fighting back in ways they'd never expect. And Alex, though unaware of the full extent of Max's strategy, started to feel something shifting, a sense that, just maybe, things were about to change. The subtle shifts in Alex's behavior didn't go unnoticed. At first, it was small. He stood a little taller, his gaze no longer fixed on the ground when he walked through the hallways. He still dreaded seeing the bullies, but now there was a new spark in his eyes. It wasn't just the support from Max, though that played a huge part. It was the quiet understanding that something had changed. Max was always there, his watchful eyes scanning the crowd, his presence like an invisible shield surrounding Alex. And slowly, Alex began to realize that maybe he wasn't as powerless as he once felt. One afternoon, as the usual group of bullies surrounded him at lunch, something unexpected happened. Mike, with his usual sneer, pushed Alex's tray, sending food scattering across the table. The laughter of the others echoed in the cafeteria. But this time, Alex didn't shrink back. He felt Max's steady presence at his side, his dog's eyes watching from a distance, ready to intervene. Instead of looking away, Alex raised his head, meeting Mike's gaze with a newfound strength in his eyes. "That's not funny," Alex said, his voice calm but firm, a far cry from the quiet whispers of the past. The moment was small, but it was everything. Mike paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He wasn't used to Alex standing up for himself, and the moment lingered in the air like a challenge. It was a crack in the power dynamic, a tiny shift that made the bullies uneasy. Max, ever watchful, had set the stage for this. His subtle disruptions, his constant vigilance, had given Alex the courage to face his tormentors in ways he never thought possible. And now, Alex could feel it. With Max by his side, he wasn't just a target anymore. The balance was tipping. The next day, when the bullies tried again, this time shoving Alex in the hallway, he didn't back down. Max was close, just out of sight, but Alex could feel the dog's silent presence, like a steady force behind him. He pushed back, not physically, but with a calmness that caught the bullies off guard. "Stop," he said, his voice unwavering. The bullies stopped, confusion and frustration flashing across their faces. They were no longer sure of their dominance. They had always thrived on Alex's fear, his silence. But now Alex's confidence was a silent rebellion, and they weren't prepared for it. The dynamic between them was shifting, and for the first time, Alex realized that he didn't need to be afraid. Not anymore. Max had seen the subtle cracks in the bullies' armor, things that no one else noticed, things that made them human. And now he was using that knowledge to his advantage. He wasn't just outsmarting them. He was quietly shifting the power from their hands into his, through carefully planned actions that no one could trace back to him. Max knew that the bullies weren't invincible. Beneath their tough exteriors, they each had their own fears, insecurities, and weaknesses. Mike, the loudest of the group, had a deep fear of dogs, a secret that no one knew, not even his friends. Whenever he saw a dog, he'd freeze up, his bravado fading. Max, always watchful, began to use this to his advantage. Every time Mike passed by, Max would growl softly from behind a corner, or dart across the path, making sure Mike heard the sound of paws skittering on the pavement. The next time Mike approached Alex, he flinched, his face contorted in a brief moment of panic. His bravado cracked, and Max watched from the shadows, satisfied. Ben was different. His weakness wasn't fear, it was pride. Ben prided himself on his appearance, his carefully styled hair, and his fashion choices. Max began to notice how often Ben adjusted his clothes, how he'd check his reflection in the glass whenever he passed a window. Max took note of every tiny detail. One day, when Ben left his backpack unattended, Max quickly snatched a piece of his favorite clothing from inside, his new expensive jacket. The next morning, as Ben reached for it, he found it shredded, the fabric torn in just the right places, making Ben furious and embarrassed. He couldn't figure out what had happened, but he knew one thing: someone was watching. Someone knew exactly where his pride lay, and they were targeting it. And then there was Jake. Jake, who prided himself on being clever, the master of words, was actually terrified of being exposed for his lack of real knowledge. Max saw this fear in the way Jake always tried to impress people with his quick wit, hiding behind sarcasm and insults. One day, when Jake was bragging in front of Alex, Max pushed a small rock into his path, causing Jake to trip and fall flat on his face in front of everyone. Jake, humiliated and unable to hide his anger, looked around but saw no one who could have caused it. Max had struck again, an invisible hand pulling the strings from the shadows. Max never let up. He remained a silent shadow, never stepping into the spotlight, but always working behind the scenes, subtly manipulating the bullies' emotions. They were starting to unravel, bit by bit, as they realized that the discomfort they felt wasn't just bad luck. It was a force they couldn't see, but one they could never escape. Max was always there, waiting, watching, one step ahead. And Alex, though unaware of the full extent of Max's strategy, felt something changing in the air. The bullies were no longer the predators. They were the prey. Max had been patient, waiting, watching, and learning. The time for subtle disruptions had passed. He'd exposed the cracks in the bullies' armor, but now it was time to make his move, his master plan. Max knew that the bullies operated on their own predictable routines. Mike, ever the leader, would always hang out near the school entrance, leading the group to torment Alex at lunch. Ben, always obsessed with his image, would pause by the locker to adjust his clothes or check his reflection. And Jake, though clever with his words, was too proud to admit his fear of failure. Max had studied them closely, knowing exactly when they'd be at their most vulnerable. He'd watched their every move, and now he was ready to turn their arrogance against them. The plan was simple but brilliant. Lure them into a situation where their own egos would be their downfall and make sure they never saw it coming. The next day, as the bullies gathered near the school entrance, Max put his plan into action. He started by knocking over a series of trash cans near the side entrance, making a loud noise. It wasn't much, but it was enough to catch the attention of Mike and his gang. As they approached, Max quietly led Alex to the other side of the school, where a large, loose tree branch was resting on the roof of a nearby shed. It was perfect, a low-hanging branch just above the bully's path, poised to fall with a small push. Max waited in the shadows, watching as the bullies walked closer. Mike, always the first to charge ahead, strutted confidently toward the spot Max had anticipated. Ben, trailing behind, was busy fixing his hair, completely unaware of what was happening. Jake, with his usual sarcasm, was making a snide remark about Alex, completely focused on taunting him. Then, with a well-timed nudge, Max caused the branch to shift ever so slightly. It hung there for a moment, then crashed down, right in front of the bullies. The sound was deafening, the crash throwing them all off balance. Mike tripped, Ben's reflection in the window shattered as he fell back, and Jake, always the smartest, was caught completely off guard. They all stood there, stunned, looking around in confusion, not realizing that they'd been trapped by their own arrogance. Max's plan had worked perfectly. The bullies had been thrown into chaos, their pride turned against them. They'd never suspect that the small, quiet dog had masterminded it all from the shadows. The dynamic had shifted once again. This time, the bullies were the ones scrambling for control. And as Alex watched the scene unfold, he felt something inside him click. He wasn't just a victim anymore. With Max by his side, he had the power to stand tall. The moment the branch crashed down, everything changed. The bullies stood frozen, their arrogance shattered in an instant. They had never expected this. Their laughter turned to confusion and then to panic as they scrambled to regain control of the situation. But it was too late. The chaos that Max had orchestrated was already in motion. Max, silent as ever, watched from the shadows, his tail twitching with satisfaction. His plan had been executed flawlessly, but this was just the beginning. The bullies, shaken by the unexpected turn of events, looked around in frustration, unable to pinpoint what had just happened. They couldn't grasp that a small dog had set this all in motion, that Max had been the mastermind behind the disruption. They had no idea that every move they made had been carefully calculated by the very creature they had underestimated. But Max wasn't done. He knew this was the moment to strike, his boldest move. As the bullies tried to regroup, trying to salvage their pride, Max seized the opportunity. He darted across the courtyard, his small form moving with the precision of a well-trained athlete. Without warning, he leapt into action, charging directly at the bullies. Mike, Ben, and Jake had no time to react. They were still trying to make sense of the situation when Max, with a snarl, nipped at their heels, his teeth just grazing their shoes. The bullies flinched, their arrogance replaced by a sudden, palpable fear. They were caught off guard, their movements sluggish as they backed away from Max. Their usual bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by hesitation. They couldn't fight back against the small dog, and that realization left them vulnerable. Alex stood there, watching in awe. For the first time, he saw the bullies, his tormentors, reduced to nothing more than frightened children. Max's courage, his determination, had done what Alex had never been able to. The tables had turned. The bullies, once in control, were now retreating, their confidence shattered. Max wasn't just protecting Alex anymore. He was giving him a chance to reclaim his power. As the bullies staggered away, Alex felt something new stir inside him. It was a mix of disbelief and wonder. He had always thought he was the one who needed saving, but now, with Max's bravery, he understood that the fight wasn't over. The battle had just begun, and with Max by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. As the bullies retreated, Alex stood frozen, his heart still racing. His mind was clouded with disbelief at what had just unfolded. For the first time, the tables had been turned. The bullies, the ones who had tormented him for so long, were now the ones cowering, powerless in the face of Max's bravery. Alex's eyes followed the retreating figures, but then something caught his attention. Max, still standing tall, his chest puffed out with pride. The dog was panting, but his eyes never left the bullies, his small body poised like a silent guardian. It was a moment of clarity for Alex. He stood there, watching Max, and suddenly, a wave of realization washed over him. All this time, Max had been more than just a pet. The little dog, always so quiet, had been fighting for him in ways Alex had never noticed before. Every disruption, every small act of defiance, the chewed-up shoes, the blocked paths, the moments when Max had stepped in without a second thought, were all part of a bigger plan. Max had been protecting him, not just physically, but emotionally, all along. Alex's mind raced as he thought back on everything Max had done. There was the time Max had quietly pulled him away from a group of bullies, subtly nudging him in the right direction, avoiding confrontation before it even started. There was the way Max had always been there after a tough day, sitting by his side, offering silent comfort. And there was the way Max had stayed vigilant, watching over him with those steady eyes, as if he knew the pain Alex carried, even when Alex couldn't voice it. Alex's heart swelled with gratitude. The realization hit him hard. Max had been his protector, his friend, his constant source of strength when Alex felt like he had none. And Max had never asked for anything in return. The bond between them, though silent and unspoken, was stronger than anything Alex had ever experienced. It wasn't just that Max had fought the bullies, it was that Max had given him the courage to face them, to stand up for himself, to realize that he wasn't alone. In that moment, Alex knew with absolute certainty that Max wasn't just a dog. He was family. The love and loyalty Max had shown were unmatched, and Alex, now fully aware of the depth of their connection, made a silent promise. He would never take Max for granted again. The bond between them was unbreakable, stronger than any obstacle that might come their way. The bullies were stunned, but their pride wouldn't allow them to let it go. Mike, Ben, and Jake couldn't believe what had just happened. They had been humiliated in front of the entire school, reduced to helpless figures in the face of a small dog. But arrogance, as always, blinded them to their own vulnerabilities. They couldn't accept that a dog, a small dog, had outsmarted them. It wasn't over. They would make sure of that. The next day, they cornered Alex by the locker. Their plan was simple: retaliate. They believed that if they could overpower Max, they could put an end to this ridiculous game. They were wrong. Max, as always, was a few steps ahead. He watched as the bullies approached, their faces twisted with frustration. This time, they weren't just taunting Alex. They had a new plan: grab the dog. Mike took the first step forward, his hand outstretched, ready to grab Max. But Max had already anticipated this. He darted out of the way, quick as a flash, leaving Mike to lunge at nothing but air. The bullies were thrown off guard, their eyes widening in disbelief as Max danced out of reach. They didn't expect the dog to be so quick, so agile. Ben and Jake moved in from the other side, trying to trap him. But Max was no ordinary dog. His instincts were razor sharp, and his mind worked like a strategist. He darted between their legs, knocking over Ben's backpack, spilling his books across the hallway. As Ben bent down to gather them, Max used this opening to dart around Jake's legs, tripping him in the process. Jake fell face first, his pride shattered as his friends struggled to regain control of the situation. The more they tried to catch him, the more embarrassed they became. Max had them in a spiral of their own making, each move they made only digging them deeper into their humiliation. The dog's speed, intelligence, and precise actions made their brute strength seem completely useless. Mike tried again, but this time he slipped on a stray book that Max had cleverly knocked aside, sending him crashing into the lockers with a loud bang. The entire scene was chaotic, but the result was clear. Max had outwitted them once again. The bullies, now covered in bruises to their pride and egos, looked more foolish than ever. Max, on the other hand, stood tall, a silent hero in the background, his victory not in brute force, but in cleverness, in outsmarting those who thought they could dominate with strength alone. As the bullies fled in embarrassment, Alex stood there, amazed and deeply grateful. He wasn't just protected anymore. He was empowered by the dog's unwavering intellect. Tension in the air was thick. Max and Alex had run out of options. The bullies, humiliated time and time again, had finally caught up to them. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. Alex's heart pounded as he found himself backed into a corner in the dark school stairwell. Max, standing firmly by his side, his fur bristling with silent defiance, knew they were out of time. The bullies, Mike, Ben, and Jake, had cornered them. Their eyes burned with anger, their patience worn thin. This time, there would be no tricks, no more clever maneuvers. The final showdown had arrived. Mike stepped forward, a dark smirk playing on his lips as Ben and Jake flanked him, closing in on Alex and Max. Max growled low, his body tense, ready for action, but he knew that brute force wouldn't work this time. The odds were stacked against them. Mike lunged, his hand reaching for Max, determined to grab the dog once and for all. Alex felt a cold wave of fear wash over him. Had they really lost? Was this the end? But then, just as Mike's fingers were about to close in on Max's fur, the dog acted, moving faster than anyone could process. It was as if Max had been waiting for this very moment, his entire plan unfolding in the blink of an eye. In a flash, Max darted forward, weaving between the bullies' legs with a speed that caught them off guard. They stumbled, unsure of how to react. But Max wasn't trying to escape. He was luring them into a trap. Alex's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Max wasn't cornered. He had led them into the very trap he had set. With an unexpected twist, Max jumped onto a nearby stack of crates, sending them toppling toward the bullies. The crates fell with a crash, blocking their path and sending the bullies sprawling. Jake collided with Ben, both of them tumbling to the ground in a chaotic heap. Mike, caught off guard, fell backward, landing on his rear with a thud. Max and Alex were free. The bullies, tangled in the debris, were left scrambling, completely disoriented. They had been outsmarted again, this time by a dog who knew exactly when and how to make his move. Max stood tall, his eyes shining with triumph, while Alex's face broke into a relieved grin. The bullies were no longer a threat. Max's cunning, his planning, his timing had turned the tide in their favor. For the first time, Alex didn't just feel safe, he felt powerful. Max had not only protected him, he had taught him the true meaning of resilience and strategy. The days after the crate incident were a turning point for Alex. He felt different. The quiet courage he had always lacked was starting to take root within him, thanks to Max. It was as if the little dog had awakened something inside of him, a sense of self-worth he never knew he had. Max's bravery, his unwavering presence, had given Alex more than just protection. It had given him confidence, the kind of confidence that couldn't be easily shaken. The bullies, still stinging from their recent humiliations, had continued their usual tactics. But this time, when Mike, Ben, and Jake approached Alex in the hallway, something was different. Alex didn't shrink back. His eyes met theirs with quiet intensity, his posture straightening as he felt Max's presence just behind him, like a shield of strength. He could almost feel the dog's energy, calm but powerful, urging him on. Mike was the first to speak, his voice dripping with mockery. "What's the matter, Alex? Finally found a backbone?" He sneered, stepping closer with a smug grin. Ben snickered, while Jake looked at Alex with a cocky look of superiority. But Alex didn't flinch. Instead, he squared his shoulders, looked Mike directly in the eye, and took a deep breath. "No," Alex said, his voice steady and clear. "I didn't find a backbone. I always had one. You just never gave me a reason to use it before." The words were simple, but they had power behind them. There was no hesitation, no fear. The bullies who had once dominated him with their taunts were now taken aback. For the first time, they were facing a version of Alex they had never seen before. He wasn't the timid, shrinking kid they could push around. He wasn't the one who would stay silent or let their insults slide off his back. He was standing up for himself, no longer afraid. Max, standing beside him, seemed to sense the shift as well. His tail was still, His eyes focused, and he gave a soft, reassuring bark as if to say, "You've got this, Alex." Mike, Ben, and Jake exchanged uneasy glances. The power they once held over Alex was slipping through their fingers. They tried to recover, but the words had already been spoken. Alex's courage, born from the quiet strength of his dog, had given him a voice that wouldn't be silenced anymore. As the bullies backed away, their arrogance fading, Alex felt something inside him change for good. He was no longer the scared kid who cowered at their words. He was someone who could face them head on, and with Max by his side, he knew he would always have the strength to stand tall. The air was thick with tension as Alex stood, unwavering, facing the bullies. Mike, Ben, and Jake, the once seemingly unstoppable trio, now found themselves standing in front of a boy they could no longer control. The surprise on their faces was palpable, and for the first time, they didn't know how to react. Alex's words had struck a nerve, and the very foundation of their bullying tactics was crumbling before them. Mike tried to recover, his usual confidence wavering. "What's the matter, Alex? You think this makes you strong? You're still the same loser we always knew," he scoffed, but his voice lacked the usual venom. Alex didn't flinch. Instead, he stood taller, his eyes focused, while Max remained by his side, still and resolute, as if silently saying, "We've got this." The bullies began to realize that their usual tricks, the taunts, the intimidation, none of it worked anymore. Alex wasn't the scared kid they could torment and mock. He had changed. Max had given him strength, and with that strength came clarity. The power had shifted. Ben, never one for confrontation, shifted uncomfortably, his usual bravado replaced with uncertainty. He looked at Jake, who in turn glared at Mike as if questioning whether their usual antics were even worth it. They had lost control, and they knew it. Alex had stood up to them. And worse, they had failed in front of the entire school. Their plan had backfired. Then, in an instant, Max made his presence known, but not through a bark or a growl. Instead, he simply stood between Alex and the bullies, his eyes locked onto theirs with quiet determination. The message was clear. You've lost. This is over. Mike, always the loudest, tried to salvage his pride, but the more he spoke, the more foolish he looked. The schoolmates who had watched from the sidelines began to murmur, realizing that Alex was no longer a victim. He was empowered, and the bullies had become nothing more than a source of ridicule. The atmosphere shifted. The crowd that had once quietly cheered on the bullies now turned, their eyes no longer filled with fear, but with admiration for Alex and his dog. Mike, Ben, and Jake, who had once commanded respect through fear, now found themselves isolated, humiliated by their own inability to control the situation. The bullies backed off, defeated, and for the first time, Alex felt a wave of relief. The bullying stopped. There were no more sneers, no more taunts. Max, in his quiet way, had changed everything. The bond between Alex and his dog had proven more powerful than anything the bullies had ever thrown at them. As Max sat by Alex's side, the true power of their friendship was clear for all to see. Alex had found his strength, not through anger or retaliation, but through the unwavering loyalty and support of the dog who had always believed in him. The schoolyard was quiet for the first time in what felt like ages. The bullies had backed off, their arrogance shattered, their power over Alex now a thing of the past. As the last of their footsteps faded into the distance, Alex stood still, taking a deep breath. The weight of what had just happened settled in, and a small smile tugged at his lips. He wasn't the same kid who had been afraid to walk the hallways anymore. He had faced his fears, stood up for himself, and had come out victorious. But it wasn't just him who had done it. Max had been there every step of the way. Max, having fulfilled his role as protector, didn't need any praise or recognition. He simply returned to his usual spot by Alex's side, as he always had. The little dog's presence was as constant as the air they breathed, a silent yet steadfast guardian who had never wavered in his loyalty. He sat down at Alex's feet, his tail giving a gentle thump against the ground, as if to say, "I'm here, as always." The bond between them had deepened beyond what words could describe. Alex looked down at Max, his heart full of gratitude. The dog had done more than protect him. He had transformed him. Max had shown Alex what it meant to have someone by your side who would never give up on you, even when you didn't believe in yourself. Max had been his silent strength, his shield when he needed it most. And even though the battle was over, the dog's job as a guardian was far from done. Max's eyes, though calm, were alert, constantly scanning the surroundings, as though he knew that danger could come from anywhere, at any time. He was always watching over Alex, a quiet sentinel, ensuring that the world remained safe for the boy who had become his whole world. The battle against the bullies may have been won, but Max knew that his duty as a protector never truly ended. No matter where they went, no matter what came their way, he would always be there, loyal, constant, unwavering. As Alex walked away from the school gates, his stride was lighter, his heart a little fuller. Max trotted alongside him, his presence an unspoken promise that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. With the bullies a distant memory, Alex walked into the school the next day with a new sense of purpose. The weight that had once burdened his shoulders had lifted, replaced by a quiet confidence. The halls, once filled with dread, now seemed like a space he could navigate with ease. The whispers and laughter of his classmates no longer held the sting they once did. Alex knew, deep down, that he had won. Not just the battle against the bullies, but a victory over his own fears. And through it all, Max had been there, steadfast and true. As days passed, Alex began to thrive in ways he hadn't thought possible. His grades improved, his friendships grew stronger, and the usual anxiety he felt in the classroom was replaced by a quiet focus. He no longer avoided the front of the room or let the whispers of others hold him back. Max, of course, remained by his side. Though the dog no longer had to step in as a protector in the same way, his presence was just as crucial. Max wasn't just a hero in the moments of crisis. He was a constant, a silent but ever-watchful companion who gave Alex the strength to be himself. Max's role had shifted too. No longer just a defender, Max had become a symbol of the strength Alex had unlocked within himself. The dog no longer needed to act in such dramatic ways, but instead, he quietly stood by Alex through each day, providing comfort, stability, and a sense of security. Whether they were walking through the hallways or sitting in class, Max's loyalty never wavered. His steady presence reminded Alex that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together. The bond between them had grown unbreakable. Where Alex once felt isolated, he now had Max, his companion, and his strength. Max was no longer just the protector, he was Alex's teammate, always there, silently encouraging him, reminding him that he was never alone. Alex knew that the world was full of challenges, but with Max at his side, he felt ready for whatever the future held. Together, they had faced the darkness, and now they walked into the future with hope and strength, an inseparable duo bound by loyalty, courage, and an unspoken promise of never giving up on each other. As the days continued to pass, Alex and Max found themselves walking through life with a sense of peace they had never known before. The weight of the past, the fear, the bullying, the loneliness had slowly melted away, leaving behind only the strong, unbreakable bond between them. Alex had come a long way. He had transformed from a boy who had once cowered in fear to one who stood tall, with confidence and a quiet strength that had been awakened through his friendship with Max. Now, the future didn't seem so daunting. Alex no longer shied away from challenges. He faced them head-on, knowing that no matter what came his way, Max would be there, right beside him. They had faced the worst together, and they had emerged victorious. The pain of the past was behind them, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. Max, always by his side, remained as loyal and watchful as ever. The dog's role had evolved from protector to constant companion, but the strength of their bond had only deepened. Max had never needed to speak. His actions, his unwavering presence, had always spoken louder than words. And Alex had learned, through every moment of struggle and triumph, that true friendship didn't require words. It was something unspoken, something felt deep in the heart. As they walked side by side, the world seemed different, brighter, more open, filled with endless possibilities. The path ahead was uncertain, as life always is, but Alex knew one thing for sure. With Max by his side, he could handle anything. The dog's loyalty and protection were constants in a world that often felt unpredictable. Together, they were unstoppable. In that moment, as they walked into the future, there was a quiet understanding between them, one that would last a lifetime. Their friendship was a powerful symbol of loyalty, protection, and the unbreakable bond that had been forged in the darkest of times. Through every challenge, every obstacle, they had stood together. And as they moved forward into a brighter future, Alex knew that no matter what came next, they would always be a team. The story of Alex and Max was more than just about overcoming bullies. It was about the quiet strength of friendship, the kind that grows from trust, loyalty, and unwavering support. And as they walked into that brighter future, it was clear that no matter where life took them, their bond would remain unbreakable and true.